The Duke's most feared hawk had shredded gloves, scarred faces, and drawn blood from every handler who dared get close, an untouchable weapon perched above the court. Until a gentle young woman walked in, lifted her bare arm without flinching, and the hawk, instead of striking, chose her. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Water pooled in the courtyards, dripped from stone archways, turned the gravel paths into rivers of gray. Callum Ridley stood at the window of what had once been his father's study and watched the downpour erase the borders between earth and sky. 8 months ago, rain like this had taken everything. He turned from the window and looked at the room he still could not think of as his own. The ledgers were open on the desk, letters stacked in neat piles. Everything in the ducal residence operated with efficiency that made grief look like laziness. From the outside, the duchy functioned exactly as it should. But Callum knew the difference between function and wholeness. The carriage accident had rewritten everything in a single night. Mud and rain and a wheel that shattered on a turn no one had thought dangerous. 2 men gone at once, father and heir, and Callum left holding a title that felt like a coat tailored for someone else's shoulders. He walked through the corridors toward the inner courtyard, the one place in the estate that refused to pretend everything was under control. The courtyard was enclosed on 3 sides by stone walls. In the center stood a wooden perch, designed for a creature that had once been Edmund's pride. The falcon sat there now, motionless in the rain, wings folded tight. After the accident, it had become something else entirely, a weapon without an owner, attacking anyone who approached. Callum stopped at the edge of the courtyard and looked up at the bird. He had been coming here every night since the funeral, speaking to the falcon as if it could carry messages to the dead. "Still raining," Callum said quietly. "You'd think it would stop eventually." The falcon shifted slightly. Callum took a step forward, and the bird's head snapped toward him, eyes bright and unblinking. "I don't know what you need," Callum continued. "I've tried everything. Fresh meat. Different handlers. None of it works." The bird's wings lifted slightly, a warning. Callum ignored it and moved closer. He reached out, hand extended, palm up. The falcon watched him for a long moment, and then it launched itself from the perch with a shriek. Callum raised his arm before the bird struck, talons raking across his forearm, wings beating against his face. He staggered back, pain flaring hot, and the falcon circled overhead before returning to its perch. Callum looked down at his arm. Blood welled up through the torn fabric, mixing with rain. It was not the first time. His hands and arms were already marked with scars from previous attempts. He turned to leave and saw her. She was standing just inside the archway from the servants' quarters, half hidden in shadow. A woman, young, dressed in plain working clothes soaked through from rain. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and she was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Not pity. Something closer to recognition. "Who are you?" he asked, voice sharper than intended. She did not flinch. "Clara Brennan. My father was William Brennan. He worked with the hunting birds before he died." Callum remembered the name vaguely. "What are you doing here?" "I live here. In the staff quarters." She paused. "That bird doesn't hate you. It's terrified." Callum looked back at the falcon. "It attacks anyone who comes near it." "Because it's in pain," Clara said, stepping into the courtyard. "The kind that doesn't heal because no one knows how to see it." Callum felt something tighten in his chest. Clara moved closer, her steps slow and deliberate. The falcon's head tracked her movement, but it did not lift its wings. "It thinks you're a threat. Every time you come here with that grief hanging off you, it panics." "I want it to live," Callum said quietly. "I don't want to lose this too." Clara turned to look at him. "Then stop trying to save it. And start trying to understand it." Before Callum could respond, she raised her arm, bare and steady, and made a sound low in her throat. The falcon cocked its head, considering. Then it spread its wings and glided down from the perch. Callum held his breath as the bird circled once, twice, and then landed on Clara's outstretched arm. Its talons gripped her skin, but gently, without violence. Clara stood perfectly still, and Callum saw something shift in the falcon's posture. Its wings folded. His breathing slowed. "How did you do that?" Callum asked, barely more than a whisper. Clara did not look at him. "I didn't do anything. I just stopped pretending I wasn't afraid." The rain continued to fall, but for the first time in 8 months, something in the courtyard felt different. The falcon remained on her arm, quiet and still, and Callum understood that he had been trying to solve the wrong problem all along. Callum demanded she stay exactly where she was. Clara glanced at him briefly, then lifted one finger to her lips in a gesture that was not a request. It was an instruction. He fell silent. The falcon remained on her arm, its weight heavy and deliberate. Clara moved with careful slowness, lowering herself onto one of the stone benches that lined the courtyard. The bird adjusted its grip but did not take flight. Rain continued to fall around them, and Callum watched from his position near the archway, aware that he was witnessing something he did not fully understand. After several minutes, Clara began to speak. Her voice was low, almost conversational, directed at the bird rather than at him. "You're angry because no one asked what you needed. They just kept trying to make you behave the way you used to." The falcon tilted its head, eyes fixed on her face. "But you can't go back to what you were," Clara continued. "None of us can. Not after something breaks the world open like that." Callum felt the words land somewhere deeper than he wanted to acknowledge. He stepped forward slowly, testing the boundaries of the moment. The falcon's gaze shifted to him but without the immediate aggression he had come to expect. "How long have you been watching?" he asked. 2 weeks, Clara said. "Maybe 3. Long enough to see the pattern. And you said nothing." "I'm staff," she replied simply. "I don't have permission to speak to you about anything that isn't directly requested." Callum felt a flash of irritation at the reminder of the invisible walls that structured life in the estate. "You're speaking to me now. Because you were about to lose more blood," Clara said. "And because that bird is suffering." The falcon shifted on her arm, and Clara adjusted her stance to accommodate its weight. Callum noticed the way her forearm muscles tensed, the controlled breathing that kept her steady. This was not luck or instinct. This was skill earned through repetition. "Your father taught you," Callum said. "Everything I know," Clara confirmed. "He started training me when I was 7. By the time I was 12, I could handle any bird on the estate." "Then why aren't you working with them now?" Clara's expression shifted, something closed and careful moving across her face. "Because after he died, the head falconer decided women didn't belong in the mews. I was reassigned to the kitchens." Callum absorbed this information, aware of the injustice embedded in it and equally aware that he had never thought to question how the household was organized. Edmund would have known. Edmund had known everyone's name, everyone's role, everyone's story. "I need your help," Callum said, the words coming out more abruptly than he intended. Clara looked at him directly for the first time since the falcon had landed on her arm. "With the bird?" "Yes." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Because it was Edmund's. Because I can't let it destroy itself or hurt someone badly enough that the household demands I put it down." "Those are reasons to solve a problem," Clara said. "I'm asking why you care." Callum struggled to find words that wouldn't sound foolish. "It's the last thing he loved that's still alive." Clara studied him for a long moment, rain dripping from her hair down her neck. Then she nodded once, a decision made. 3 weeks. Full access to the courtyard and the bird. No interference from other handlers. And I need to be here every day, not just when it's convenient." "Done," Callum said immediately. "I'm not finished," Clara continued. "At the end of 3 weeks, whether this works or not, I want a written reference. One that says I'm qualified to work with hunting birds, signed by you." Callum understood what she was asking for. A document like that could open doors beyond the estate, could undo the head falconer's dismissal. "Agreed. Anything else?" "Yes," Clara said. "You stay away from the bird unless I'm here. Every time you approach it alone, you undo whatever progress we make." "This is my estate," Callum said, though without heat. "And it's your brother's bird," Clara replied. "Which means it's carrying your brother's absence. Every time it sees you, it's looking for him. Until we break that pattern, you're just a reminder of what's missing." The truth of it was sharp and immediate. Callum wanted to argue but found he had no ground to stand on. "Fine. But you'll need to stay on the grounds. Not in the staff quarters, somewhere closer. The old falconer's cottage near the mews." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's your father's decision to make." "I'm the Duke," Callum said quietly. "Apparently that means it's mine now." Clara stood slowly, and the falcon remained calm on her arm. She walked toward the perch and made a soft clicking sound. The bird stepped from her arm onto the wood, settling its feathers. Clara stepped back and the falcon watched her but did not strike. "Tomorrow morning," Clara said, turning to face Callum. "Dawn. Be here if you want to understand what happens next." She walked past him toward the servants' quarters, leaving him alone in the rain with a bird that, for the first time in 8 months, looked something other than broken. Dawn came cold and gray, the rain finally reduced to mist. Callum stood in the courtyard before the sun fully rose, his breath visible in the air. He had not slept well. The conversation with Clara had circled through his mind, her words about the falcon looking for Edmund every time it saw him. He wondered if the same was true in reverse, if he came to the courtyard not to help the bird, but to punish himself for still being alive. Clara arrived precisely at sunrise, carrying a leather bag and wearing a coat that had clearly belonged to her father. It hung loose on her frame, sleeves rolled back to reveal her forearms. She acknowledged Callum with a brief nod and set the bag down near the perch. "First rule," she said without preamble. "Stop thinking of this as training. You can't train grief out of a creature." "Then what are we doing?" "Teaching it that the world hasn't ended," Clara said. "Even though it feels like it has." She began removing items from the bag. Strips of raw meat, a pair of worn leather gloves, a small whistle on a cord. The falcon watched from its perch, alert but not agitated. Clara moved through the space as if she had always belonged there, her steps deliberate and unhurried. "Your brother?" she said, eyes on the bird. "How did he work with it?" Callum had to think back, piecing together memories from before the accident. "Every morning. He'd come out here before breakfast. Sometimes he'd fly it, sometimes just sit with it. He talked to it constantly." "About what?" "Everything. His day, his frustrations, things he was reading. He treated it like a conversation partner." Clara nodded slowly. "So it's not just missing him. It's missing the routine. The predictability." She glanced at Callum. "When you come here at night, erratic and bleeding, you're the opposite of what it learned to trust." The observation stung because it was accurate. Callum had been approaching the falcon the way he approached everything else since the accident, with desperate urgency, trying to fix things through sheer force of will. "Show me what you do when you're alone with it," Clara said. Callum hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. "I just talk. Like Edmund did." "Then talk now." He moved closer to the perch, and immediately the falcon's posture shifted. Its wings lifted slightly, body tensing. Callum stopped, feeling the familiar frustration rise in his chest. "I don't know what to say when someone's watching." "Then pretend I'm not here," Clara said. "Or accept that I am and say it anyway." Callum took a breath and looked up at the bird. "It's morning. You probably noticed. Different from when I usually visit." His voice sounded awkward to his own ears, too formal. "Clara thinks she can help you. Help both of us, maybe." The falcon's head cocked slightly, tracking his movements. "I know I'm not him," Callum continued, the words coming harder now. "I know every time you see me you're waiting for him to appear. I'm waiting for that too." Clara stepped forward suddenly, positioning herself between Callum and the bird. "Stop," she said quietly. "What did I do wrong?" "You're apologizing," Clara said. "For existing. For being the one who survived. The bird doesn't understand guilt, it only understands fear and safety. When you come here drowning in shame, it reads you as a threat." Callum felt something crack open in his chest. "I don't know how to stop." "I'm not asking you to stop feeling it," Clara said, her voice gentler now. "I'm asking you to put it down before you walk into this courtyard. Just for the time you're here." She reached into the bag and pulled out a strip of meat. The falcon's eyes tracked the movement immediately. Clara made the same low sound she had the night before, and the bird's attention sharpened. She tossed the meat onto the ground halfway between the perch and where they stood. The falcon did not move at first. Then, with a swift motion, it dropped from the perch and landed near the meat. It mantled over the food, wings spread in a protective posture, and began to tear at it. "It's eating in front of us," Callum said, surprised. "It's starting to remember that hunger matters more than grief," Clara replied. "That survival isn't betrayal." They watched in silence as the falcon fed. When it finished, it did not immediately return to the perch. Instead, it stood on the ground, feathers smoothing, and looked at them with something that might have been curiosity. Clara turned to Callum. "This isn't going to be fast. And it's going to require you to show up differently than you have been." "I can do that," Callum said. "Can you?" Clara asked, and the question felt like a challenge. "Because from where I stand you're as trapped as that bird. And if you can't find your way out, neither will it." The mist continued to fall around them, soft and persistent, and Callum realized that Clara Brennan saw more than he had given her permission to see. The question was whether he had the courage to let her keep looking. The cottage near the mews had been empty since William Brennan's death 2 years prior. When Clara pushed open the door that afternoon, dust swirled in the pale light. The space was small, one main room with a fireplace, a narrow alcove for sleeping, a table and 2 chairs. But it had windows that faced the courtyard, and that was what mattered. Callum had arranged for the cottage to be cleaned and provisioned, though he had not told anyone why. The household staff obeyed without question, accustomed to ducal requests that required no explanation. By evening, Clara had moved her few belongings from the servants' quarters, and for the first time in 2 years she slept in the place where she had grown up. The work with the falcon began in earnest the next morning. Clara established a routine that was rigid in its consistency. Dawn feeding, midday observation, evening flight practice in the enclosed courtyard. Callum attended every session, standing where Clara instructed, speaking when permitted, learning to read the bird's body language the way she did. "It's not responding to words," Clara explained on the third day. "It's responding to your nervous system. If you're calm, it can be calm. If you're flooding with panic, it panics." "I'm not panicking," Callum said. Clara gave him a look that suggested otherwise. "Your breathing is shallow. Your shoulders are up near your ears. You're gripping your hands together hard enough that your knuckles are white." Callum forced himself to relax, feeling foolish. "I'm trying." "I know," Clara said, and something in her tone softened. "But trying too hard is its own kind of violence." The observation settled between them, and Callum realized she was not just talking about the bird. Over the following days he began to notice things about Clara that he had not registered initially. The way she moved through space with economy and precision. The way she spoke to the falcon with the same steady tone she used for everything, never condescending, never performative. The way she watched him when she thought he was focused elsewhere, as if cataloging information she might need later. On the 5th day the falcon flew to Callum's gloved hand for the first time. The weight of it shocked him, the realness of the creature, the trust implied in the gesture. He looked at Clara, who stood a few feet away, and saw something close to satisfaction in her expression. "Don't move," she said quietly. "Just let it sit." Callum stood frozen, barely breathing, while the falcon adjusted its grip and settled. It stayed for perhaps 30 seconds before launching back to the perch, but those 30 seconds felt monumental. "Progress," Clara said. That evening, as the light faded, Clara remained in the courtyard after the session ended. Callum found himself lingering as well, neither of them quite ready to leave. The falcon was preening on its perch, calm and self-contained. "Can I ask you something?" Callum said. Clara looked at him, waiting. "You said your father taught you everything. But you also said you stopped working with the birds after he died. Why come back to it now?" Clara was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. "Because I didn't have a choice before. I was sent away from the work and I didn't have the position to fight it. This is the first time someone with authority has asked me to do what I'm actually good at." "And the reference I promised?" "Insurance," Clara said bluntly. "So that when this is over, I'm not trapped again." Callum nodded, understanding the practicality even as it stung slightly. "You don't trust that I'll follow through." "I don't trust that you'll still be Duke in a way that matters," Clara said. "You wear the title like a coat that doesn't fit. Someone's going to notice eventually." "Someone already has," Callum admitted. "The household council. My cousin Victor, specifically. He thinks I'm too soft for the role. That I let sentiment cloud judgment." "Do you?" "Probably," Callum said. "But I don't know how else to be." Clara studied him in the fading light. "Your brother, was he soft?" "No," Callum said immediately. Then reconsidered. "Or maybe he was, but he hid it better. He knew how to be what people needed him to be. And you don't." "I don't even know what people need," Callum said. "I spent my entire life preparing for a role I'd never have. Now I have it and I'm lost." Clara stepped closer, her expression serious. "Then maybe stop trying to be your brother. The bird isn't getting better because I'm pretending to be my father. It's getting better because I'm doing the work in front of me." The words landed with unexpected weight. Callum wanted to argue, to explain that it was more complicated than that, but he suspected Clara already knew. She had a way of cutting through pretense that was both uncomfortable and oddly reassuring. "Thank you," Callum said quietly, "for saying that." Clara nodded once, then turned toward the cottage. "Same time tomorrow, Your Grace." "Callum," he said. "When we're here, just Callum." She paused, glanced back. "That's not how this works." "Maybe it should be," Callum said. Clara did not reply, but something in her expression shifted before she disappeared into the cottage. Callum remained in the courtyard, watching the falcon settle for the night, and wondered when exactly this had stopped being only about the bird. The household council met every Thursday in the large drawing room that overlooked the eastern gardens. Callum had grown to dread these meetings, 3 hours of reports, disputes, and thinly veiled assessments of his competence. Victor Ridley, his cousin and the most vocal member of the council, had a particular talent for framing concerns as helpful observations. This Thursday Victor arrived early. Callum found him already seated, reviewing documents with the focused attention of someone preparing for battle. "Cousin," Victor said without looking up, "I trust you're well." "Well enough," Callum replied, taking his seat at the head of the table. Victor set down his papers and leaned back, fingers steepled. "I've been hearing interesting reports from the staff. Something about the Falcon." Callum kept his expression neutral. "It's being handled by a kitchen worker," Victor said. "A woman with no official position in the falconry program." "By someone with extensive training and skill," Callum corrected. "Who happens to be currently assigned to the kitchens." Victor's smile was thin. "And who is now living in estate housing typically reserved for senior staff. On your personal authorization." The other council members began to arrive, filing into the room with quiet efficiency. Callum waited until everyone was seated before responding. "William Brennan served this estate for 20 years. His daughter has proven herself capable of managing a situation that has been dangerous and unresolved for 8 months. I saw no reason to deny her appropriate accommodation." "No one is questioning your generosity," Victor said smoothly. "Only your judgment. The bird has been violent and unpredictable. Allowing someone without official standing to work with it creates liability. Less liability than allowing it to continue attacking trained handlers," Callum said. "Then perhaps," Victor said, his tone sharpening, "the answer is to acknowledge that the creature is unsalvageable. It was your brother's bird and your brother is gone. Keeping it alive out of sentiment serves no one." The room went very quiet. Callum felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the anger that had nowhere safe to land. "The bird is improving. Given time." "Time," Victor interrupted, "is not something you have in unlimited supply. This estate requires leadership that makes difficult decisions, not one that delays them out of emotional attachment." Callum forced himself to meet his cousin's gaze. 3 weeks. That's the timeline I've set. If there's no significant progress by then, we'll revisit the conversation." Victor nodded slowly as if Callum had just confirmed something he suspected. 3 weeks. I'll hold you to that." The meeting continued, but Callum barely tracked the discussions. He could feel Victor's attention on him throughout, a weight that felt like evaluation. When the council finally adjourned, Victor lingered. "I'm not your enemy," Victor said once they were alone. "I'm trying to help you. By suggesting I kill my brother's falcon. By suggesting you stop letting grief make your decisions," Victor replied. "The estate is watching you, Callum. They're waiting to see if you're capable of leading or if you're simply keeping the seat warm until someone else steps in." "Someone like you?" Victor's expression hardened. "If necessary. I have no desire to take what's rightfully yours. But I won't stand by and watch this duchy fall apart because you can't separate sentiment from duty." He left before Callum could respond, and Callum remained in the empty drawing room, feeling the ground shift beneath him in ways he could not quite name. That evening, he went to the courtyard and found Clara working with the falcon in the fading light. The bird was flying short distances, returning to her arm with increasing confidence. When she noticed Callum, she signaled for him to wait until the exercise was complete. "You're late," she said when the falcon was back on its perch. Council meeting ran long. Clara studied his face. "Bad one?" "My cousin thinks I should put the bird down. That keeping it alive is sentiment, not leadership." Clara was quiet for a moment, wiping her hands on a cloth. "What do you think?" "I think he's probably right," Callum admitted. "About the sentiment part. I don't know if I'm doing this for the bird or for myself." "Does it matter?" Clara asked. "The work is the same either way. It matters if I'm making decisions that harm the estate." Clara crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. "Your cousin sounds like someone who thinks caring about things is weakness. He thinks it clouds judgment." "Maybe," Clara said. "Or maybe judgment without care is just cruelty with better manners." Callum felt something loosen in his chest. "Victor's not wrong about everything. I'm struggling. The council sees it, the staff sees it. I'm not my father or my brother, and pretending otherwise isn't working." "Then stop pretending," Clara said. "Be whoever you actually are and let that be enough." "What if it's not?" Clara met his eyes directly. "Then at least you'll fail as yourself instead of as a poor copy of someone else." The honesty of it was startling. Callum realized that Clara was perhaps the only person in the estate who spoke to him without calculation, without trying to shape him into something useful. It was uncomfortable and necessary in equal measure. 3 weeks, he said quietly. "That's what I promised them. If the bird isn't stable by then, I'll have to make a decision." "Then we have 3 weeks, Clara said simply. Stop worrying about what happens after and focus on what's in front of you. She was right, Callum knew. But as he watched her return to the cottage, he wondered what would happen when 3 weeks ended and he had to choose between what the estate demanded and what he actually wanted. The second week brought a shift in the quality of silence between them. The work with the Falcon continued with steady progress. Longer flights, calmer responses, fewer moments of panic. But the boundary between professional distance and something else had begun to blur in ways neither of them acknowledged directly. It started with small things. Clara began arriving at the courtyard to find tea waiting, still hot, placed on the stone ledge near her bag. Callum never mentioned leaving it and Clara never thanked him, but the cup was always empty by midday. In turn, Callum found his gloves repaired one morning, the torn leather carefully stitched, left on the bench where he usually sat. They fell into conversations that extended beyond the Falcon. Clara spoke about her father, about growing up in a world where her skill mattered less than her gender. Callum talked about Edmund, about the particular loneliness of being the spare, loved but ultimately unnecessary until catastrophe made him essential. He used to joke about it, Callum said one evening as they watched the Falcon preen. Call me the insurance policy. He didn't mean it cruelly, but it was true. My entire existence was conditional, valuable only if he failed to survive. And now you're angry at him for dying, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Callum flinched. That's a terrible thing to say. It's a true thing to say, Clara corrected. You can love someone and still be furious at them for leaving. I shouldn't be. Why not? Clara turned to face him fully. Because he didn't choose it? Grief doesn't follow rules about what's fair. Neither does anger. Callum looked at her, this woman who spoke about loss with the practicality of someone who had survived it, and felt something shift. Were you angry? When your father died? Constantly, Clara said. For months. He had a weak heart, everyone knew it. And he kept working anyway, kept pushing himself because he didn't trust anyone else with the birds. When he collapsed in the mews, I hated him for it. For choosing his pride over his life. But you still became a falconer. Because anger doesn't erase love, Clara said. It just sits next to it, taking up space. The Falcon chose that moment to fly down from its perch, landing on the ground between them. It walked forward with deliberate steps and stopped near Callum's feet, head tilted upward. Callum froze. Don't move, Clara said softly. Let it decide. The bird watched him for a long moment, then spread its wings slightly, not in aggression but in something closer to display. Then it walked to Clara, hopped onto her extended arm and settled. That was different, Callum said. It's starting to understand you're not a threat, Clara explained. That you're part of its environment now, not an intruder. How long before it trusts me the way it trusts you? Clara's expression turned serious. It will never trust you the way it trusts me. But that's not the goal. The goal is for it to trust you as yourself, not as a replacement for your brother. The words hung between them and Callum realized they were no longer just talking about the Falcon. That night, Callum couldn't sleep. He found himself walking through the estate's corridors, past the portrait gallery where generations of Ridleys stared down with certainty he did not feel. He ended up in the library, lighting a lamp and pulling out the journals Edmund had kept about falconry. He had avoided reading them before, unable to face his brother's handwriting, the detailed observations and casual brilliance that had come so naturally to Edmund. But now he opened the most recent volume and began to read. The entries were technical at first, feeding schedules, flight patterns, behavioral notes. But toward the end the tone shifted. Edmund had written about doubt, about the pressure of being heir, about wondering if he was performing competence rather than actually possessing it. Father makes it look effortless, one entry read. I'm terrified someone will realize I'm pretending, that I'll make the wrong choice and destroy everything he built. Sometimes I think Callum would be better at this. He actually thinks before acting. I just perform confidence and hope it's enough. Callum read the passage 3 times, something cracking open in his understanding. Edmund had been afraid too. Had doubted too. The difference was that he had hidden it well enough that even Callum, who knew him better than anyone, had never suspected. The next morning, Callum went to the courtyard carrying the journal. Clara was already there, preparing for the day's work. He held out the book without explanation. My brother's journal, he said. There's an entry about 3 months before the accident. He talks about the Falcon panicking during a hunt, how it took him weeks to rebuild trust. I thought you might want to read it. Clara took the journal carefully, recognizing the offering for what it was. Not just information but intimacy. Thank you. Clara, Callum said, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She looked up at him, waiting. I'm glad you're here, he said finally. Not just for the bird. For me. Clara held his gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. I know, she said quietly. That's what worries me. Before Callum could ask what she meant, the falcon cried out sharply, a sound of distress. They both turned toward the perch and saw the bird thrashing, wings beating against air, eyes wild with panic. Something had shifted, and neither of them understood what or why. Clara moved toward the falcon with controlled urgency, her voice low and steady. The bird continued to thrash, slamming against the perch with a violence they had not seen in days. Callum started to follow, but Clara held up a hand, stopping him. Something's wrong, she said, eyes never leaving the falcon. This isn't fear. This is pain. She approached slowly, speaking in the calm tone she always used, but the bird did not settle. When she finally got close enough to examine it, she saw the problem immediately. The falcon's eyes were dilated unevenly, its breathing rapid and shallow. She looked down at the feeding dish and froze. Did you prepare the meat this morning? She asked Callum, her voice tight. No. It was already here when I arrived. I assumed you'd left it. Clara knelt beside the dish, studying the raw meat. She brought it close to her face, sniffed, then set it down carefully. This smells wrong. Too sweet. And look at the water, there's residue at the bottom. Callum crouched beside her, seeing what she meant. A faint film coated the inside of the water bowl, barely visible. What does that mean? It means someone tampered with the food, Clara said flatly. Something that would make the bird sick. Agitated. Who would do that? Clara stood, her expression hard. Someone who wants this to fail. The falcon's crisis lasted another hour. Clara managed to get it to vomit most of what it had consumed, then kept it calm through the worst of the symptoms. By midday, the bird was exhausted but stable, sleeping fitfully on the perch. Clara's hands shook slightly as she cleaned up, though her face remained composed. This can't happen again, she said. From now on, I prepare everything. No one else touches the bird's food or water. I'll inform the staff, Callum said, anger simmering beneath his words. Don't, Clara said sharply. If someone did this deliberately, announcing new precautions will just tell them we know. They'll find another way. Callum wanted to argue, to demand an investigation, to make whoever was responsible answer for what they'd done. But Clara's logic was sound. Then what do? We watch, Clara said. We document everything. And we don't let the bird out of our sight. That evening, Clara refused to leave the courtyard. She pulled a chair near the perch and settled in with a blanket, prepared to spend the night. Callum brought food from the main house and sat with her, neither of them speaking about the fact that this had become something other than a professional arrangement. It was Victor, Callum said finally, breaking the silence. It had to be. He's the only one who benefits if this fails. You don't know that, Clara said, though her tone suggested she'd had the same thought. He told me the bird should be destroyed. That keeping it alive was sentiment. And now, conveniently, it has a violent episode just as we're making progress. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Even if it was him, you can't prove it. And accusing a council member without evidence would only make you look paranoid. So he just gets away with it? For now, Clara said. Until we have something concrete. Callum felt the injustice of it like a physical weight. I'm tired of playing these games. Of pretending everything is strategy and politics when what I actually want is to. He stopped himself, but Clara had already turned to look at him. To what? To tell the council to go to hell, Callum said. To stop performing competence I don't feel and just admit I don't know what I'm doing most of the time. And then what? Clara asked. They'd remove you. Put Victor in your place. And everything you're trying to protect would be gone. Would that be so terrible? Callum asked, the question raw. Maybe Victor's right. Maybe I'm not suited for this. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her gaze on the sleeping falcon. Do you know what I see when I watch you work with that bird? Callum shook his head. I see someone who keeps showing up even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. Even when it would be easier to walk away. She looked at him directly. That's not weakness. That's the only kind of strength that actually matters. Something in Callum's chest tightened. Clara. Don't, she said quietly. Whatever you're about to say, don't. Not here. Not now. Not when everything is this complicated. Why not? Because I'm staff, Clara said, her voice careful. Because you're the Duke. Because if anyone finds out you have feelings for me, it becomes ammunition. Victor would use it to prove you're unfit, that you let personal attachments compromise judgment. I don't care what Victor thinks. You should, Clara said. Because if he removes you, I lose everything too. The bird gets destroyed. I get sent back to the kitchens or dismissed entirely. And whatever this is between us becomes just another mistake in a long line of them. The honesty of it was brutal. Callum wanted to argue, to insist that his position gave him the authority to make his own choices. But he understood the precariousness of Clara's situation, the way her safety depended on his continued power. So we pretend, he said. We survive, Clara corrected. There's a difference. The falcon stirred in its sleep, a soft sound escaping its beak. Clara rose to check on it, and Callum watched her move through the space with practiced ease. He realized then that loving someone could mean protecting them from your own desires, from the consequences of acting on feelings that might destroy them both. 2 weeks left, Callum said quietly. Clara nodded without turning around. Then we'd better make them count. The falcon recovered, but the incident changed everything. Clara implemented strict protocols. She alone handled all food preparation, kept the courtyard locked when not in use, and documented every session in meticulous detail. Callum arranged for a trusted groundskeeper to patrol the area at night, though they told no one why. The work intensified. With less than 2 weeks remaining, Clara pushed the falcon harder, extending flight times and introducing more complex exercises. The bird responded well, its trust in her absolute. With Callum, progress was slower but undeniable. The falcon would now accept food from his hand, tolerate his presence without agitation, even fly short distances to his glove. But Victor was watching. Callum felt his cousin's attention like a weight, saw him speaking quietly with other council members, observed the way staff had begun to treat him with careful deference that felt like pity. Something was building, though Callum could not identify exactly what. On the third day of the final week, Victor requested a private meeting. They sat in the smaller study, the one that had been Edmund's favorite, and Callum resented the choice of location. The 3 weeks are nearly up, Victor said without preamble. I assume you're prepared to present the falcon's progress to the council. The bird is significantly improved, Callum said. Clara has. Miss Brennan, Victor interrupted, has been living in estate housing and working exclusively with the falcon for 17 days. At considerable expense and disruption to household operations. Minimal expense, Callum countered. And the only disruption has been positive. Victor leaned forward, his expression serious. Callum, I'm going to be direct because someone needs to be. There are rumors about you and the falconer's daughter. Callum's blood went cold. What kind of rumors? The predictable kind, Victor said. That you're spending excessive time alone with her. That you've given her preferential treatment and housing. That your judgment regarding the falcon is compromised by personal feelings. That's absurd. Is it? Victor asked. Because from where I sit, you've reorganized household operations, allocated resources, and made yourself unavailable for estate business. All to spend time working with a bird and a woman who has no official standing. I've attended every council meeting, Callum said. I've fulfilled every ducal obligation. You've been physically present, Victor agreed. But everyone can see where your attention actually is. And people are starting to ask questions about your priorities. Callum forced himself to remain calm. What do you want, Victor? I want you to succeed, Victor said, and there was something almost genuine in his tone. But you're making it impossible. If you present this situation to the council, the falcon, Miss Brennan, the entire arrangement, they're going to see exactly what I see. A duke who can't separate personal desire from professional responsibility. The falcon is improving. That's measurable, demonstrable progress. And Miss Brennan's role in that progress? Victor pressed. How do you explain giving her authority she doesn't formally possess? How do you justify the housing, the access, the deviation from protocol? Callum realized the trap Victor had constructed. Any defense of Clara would sound like personal attachment. Any acknowledgement of her skill would raise questions about why she hadn't been officially reinstated. There was no position that didn't confirm Victor's narrative. What are you proposing? Callum asked quietly. Remove Miss Brennan from the situation, Victor said. Bring in the official head falconer to complete the work. Present the bird's progress as the result of proper protocol and patience. The council will be satisfied, the rumors will fade, and you'll demonstrate that you can make difficult decisions. And Clara? Returns to her previous position. With the reference you promised if you insist. But this arrangement ends. No, Callum said immediately. Victor's expression hardened. Then you're choosing sentiment over leadership. Exactly what I warned you about. I'm choosing competence over politics, Callum said. Clara is the reason the falcon is alive. Removing her now would be both cruel and stupid. Then prepare to defend that position to the council, Victor said, standing. Because I'm calling for a formal review. 3 days from now. You'll present the falcon and justify every decision you've made regarding it. He left before Callum could respond. Callum remained in Edmund's study, feeling the walls close in. Victor had outmaneuvered him, created a situation where any choice would carry consequences. Defend Clara and confirm the rumors of personal attachment. Remove her and destroy the trust they'd built with the falcon. There was no clean way forward. That evening he told Clara about the meeting. They sat in the courtyard as the sun set, the falcon calm on its perch between them. He's going to force you to choose, Clara said after a long silence. I know. And if you choose me, he'll use it to remove you. Probably. Clara stood, pacing the length of the courtyard. Then you can't choose me. You have to remove me from the work, bring in the official falconer, and present this as protocol. I won't do that to you. You have to, Clara said, her voice urgent now. Because if you don't, Victor wins anyway. He removes you, I lose everything, and the falcon gets destroyed. At least this way the bird survives and you keep your position. And you? Clara's smile was bitter. I go back to the kitchens. Where I've always belonged, according to people like Victor. Callum stood, moving closer to her. There has to be another way. There isn't, Clara said. Not one that doesn't cost more than either of us can afford. The falcon cried out softly as if sensing the tension. Clara turned toward it, and Callum saw her shoulders tighten. They had 3 days to find a solution that didn't exist, to navigate a trap designed to destroy them regardless of what they chose. Callum didn't sleep that night. He sat in the library going through estate records, council precedents, anything that might provide leverage or options. Dawn found him exhausted and no closer to a solution. When he arrived at the courtyard, Clara was already working with the falcon, her movements precise despite the weight of what hung over them. I have an idea, Callum said without preamble. Clara didn't stop her work. I'm listening. What if we formalize your position? Not just as someone helping with one bird but as an official falconer. With a title, salary, and authority. The head falconer would never allow it. The head falconer serves at my discretion, Callum said. I can restructure the department. Create a position that reports directly to me. Clara finally paused, turning to face him. You'd create a job just for me? You realize how that looks. It looks like I'm correcting an injustice. Your father trained you for years. You have demonstrable skill. The only reason you're not already in that role is prejudice. And Victor will frame it as the Duke inventing positions for women he's involved with, Clara said bluntly. It makes everything worse, not better. Callum knew she was right, but the helplessness was maddening. So we just accept this? Let Victor dictate terms? No, Clara said slowly, something calculating in her expression. We change the terms entirely. How? By making this about the bird, not about us, Clara said. The council review is in 3 days. What if we demonstrate the falcon's progress so completely that the question of who trained it becomes irrelevant? The bird is doing well, but it's not fully recovered. Not recovered, Clara interrupted. Transformed. We show them something they can't dismiss or politicize. Something undeniable. She explained her plan. It was ambitious, possibly reckless, and required the falcon to perform at a level they had not yet attempted. But it was also the only strategy that shifted the ground beneath Victor's trap. The next 2 days were brutal. Clara worked with the falcon from dawn until well after dark, pushing both the bird and herself to the edge of exhaustion. Callum assisted where he could, but mostly he watched Clara move through the exercises with fierce determination, refusing to let anything, fatigue, doubt, or the pressure of what was at stake, slow her down. On the second night she finally allowed herself to rest. They sat together in the courtyard, the falcon asleep on its perch, both of them too tired to maintain the careful distance they'd been preserving. Can I ask you something? Clara said quietly. Anything. If this works, if we somehow pull this off and you remain Duke, what happens after? Callum was silent for a moment. What do you want to happen? That's not an answer. Because I don't know what I'm allowed to want, Callum said. Victor's right about one thing. My feelings for you complicate everything. They make me vulnerable. They give ammunition to anyone who wants to question my judgment. So you regret them, Clara said, and something in her voice suggested she was bracing for confirmation. No, Callum said immediately. I regret that the world is structured in a way that makes them dangerous. But I don't regret feeling them. Clara looked at him in the dim light, and Callum saw the same conflict he felt reflected in her expression. I told myself this was just work. That I could help you with the falcon, get my reference and move on. But somewhere along the way it stopped being that simple. When? Callum asked. The morning you brought your brother's journal, Clara said. You trusted me with something that mattered. Not because I was useful, but because you wanted me to understand. Callum reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He took her hand, feeling the calluses from years of working with birds, the strength in her fingers. After the review, he said, when this immediate crisis is over, can we figure out what this is? Without Victor or the council or estate politics forcing our choices. That assumes we survive the review, Clara said. We will. You don't know that. No, Callum admitted. But I'm choosing to believe it anyway. Because the alternative is accepting defeat before we've even tried. Clara squeezed his hand once, then released it. Then we'd better make sure your faith isn't misplaced. The day of the council review arrived cold and clear. The entire household council assembled in the courtyard, along with the head falconer and several senior staff members. Victor stood to one side, his expression carefully neutral, but Callum could see the anticipation in his posture. He expected this to be Callum's downfall. Clara had changed into clothing that had belonged to her father. Proper falconry attire, well-maintained despite years of disuse. She stood beside the perch, her spine straight, her face composed. The falcon sat calmly, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Callum addressed the council, his voice steady. 3 weeks ago this bird was violent, unpredictable and dangerous. Every trained handler had given up on it. Today you'll see what Miss Brennan has accomplished through skill, patience and dedication. Victor stepped forward. Before we begin, I'd like to address the irregular nature of this entire arrangement. You'll have time for questions after the demonstration, Callum said, cutting him off. Miss Brennan, please proceed. Clara nodded once and began. Clara raised her gloved arm, and the falcon launched from the perch with powerful wing beats. It circled the courtyard once, twice, climbing higher with each pass. The council members watched in silence, tracking the bird's flight. Clara stood motionless, her arms still extended, waiting. The falcon completed a wide arc and dove, folding its wings in a controlled stoop that demonstrated both speed and precision. At the last moment, it flared and landed on Clara's glove with barely a sound. Several council members murmured appreciation. The head falconer's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his skeptical expression. Basic recall, Victor said dismissively. Any competent handler could achieve that. Clara didn't respond. She simply sent the falcon up again, this time with a whistle command that changed mid-flight. The bird adjusted instantly, switching from a circular pattern to a figure eight, then banking sharply toward the far wall before returning. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, responsive. Flight pattern variation, Clara said, her voice carrying clearly, demonstrating cognitive flexibility and trust. The bird is not simply following trained behavior, it's actively interpreting commands and making decisions. She continued through a series of exercises, each more complex than the last. The falcon flew to different perches on command, distinguished between similar whistle tones, and executed hunting patterns with imaginary prey. The performance was flawless, and even Victor had fallen silent, watching with what might have been grudging respect. Then Clara turned to Callum. Your Grace, if you would assist. Callum stepped forward, his heart pounding. This was the part they had practiced least, the element of the demonstration that carried the most risk. He extended his gloved arm, and Clara sent the falcon toward him. The bird flew directly to Callum's glove and landed, settling immediately. The council members leaned forward, clearly surprised. The falcon had attacked every handler except Clara for 8 months, and now it perched calmly on the Duke's arm, showing no sign of aggression. The bird now recognizes his grace as safe, Clara explained. More than that, it accepts him as part of its environment. This represents a fundamental shift in its psychological state. Callum kept his breathing steady, feeling the falcon's weight, its grip on the leather. Clara met his eyes briefly, a silent question. Ready? He nodded slightly. Clara made a sound he hadn't heard before, a low, complex call that she'd spent hours perfecting. The falcon's head cocked, listening. Then it launched from Callum's arm and flew directly to Clara's shoulder. Not her glove, but her actual shoulder, settling into a position that suggested intimacy rather than mere training. The courtyard went absolutely silent. What they were witnessing wasn't just obedience or learned behavior. It was genuine bond, the kind that took years to develop. The falcon trusted Clara completely, enough to perch on her in a way that left her vulnerable, that required absolute faith on both sides. This bird was traumatized, Clara said quietly, the falcon still balanced on her shoulder. It had lost its bonded human and didn't understand why. Everything it knew about safety and trust had been destroyed. What you're seeing now isn't training, it's healing. And healing doesn't happen through protocol or official positions. It happens through consistency, patience, and actually giving a damn whether the creature in your care survives or falls apart. She looked directly at Victor as she said this last part, and the challenge in her gaze was unmistakable. The head falconer stepped forward, his expression transformed from skepticism to something closer to awe. "Miss Brennan," he said formally, "I've been working with birds for 30 years. What you've accomplished here is extraordinary. Your father would be proud." Clara's composure cracked slightly at this, though she recovered quickly. "Thank you, sir." Victor cleared his throat. The bird's improvement is evident. However, the question remains, was this arrangement, the housing, the exclusive access, the deviation from established protocol, truly necessary? Or could similar results have been achieved through proper channels? It was Callum who answered. The proper channels failed for 8 months. Every established handler gave up. Miss Brennan succeeded where protocol failed, and she did it in 3 weeks. That's not sentiment, that's recognizing competence regardless of where it comes from. Competence found in a convenient place, Victor said. Given your personal interest in Miss Brennan's success. The accusation hung in the air. This was the moment Victor had been building toward, the trap springing shut. Callum felt Clara tense beside him, saw her calculating whether to defend him or remain silent. But before either of them could speak, the head falconer interrupted. "Forgive me, Lord Ridley, but I find that implication insulting. To Miss Brennan certainly, but also to our profession. What she demonstrated today represents skill at a level I've rarely seen. Attributing that to the Duke's personal feelings diminishes genuine mastery." Another council member nodded. "The bird is recovered. The situation is resolved. I see no reason to question His Grace's judgment when the results speak for themselves." Victor's expression hardened, but Callum could see him recalculating, recognizing that the ground had shifted. The demonstration had been too impressive, Clara's skill too undeniable. The narrative Victor wanted to construct, incompetent Duke manipulated by personal feelings, no longer fit what the council had witnessed. "Very well," Victor said tightly. "I concede the falcon is improved. But that doesn't address the broader question of Miss Brennan's position going forward." Clara lifted the falcon from her shoulder back to her glove, then to its perch. When she turned back to the council, her voice was steady. "I require no position, my lords. I came to help with one bird, and that work is complete. His Grace promised me a reference, which I trust he'll provide. Beyond that, I have no expectations." She was giving Callum an exit, offering to walk away cleanly and leave him untarnished. But as Callum looked at her, this woman who had saved his brother's falcon, who had taught him that grief could coexist with survival, who had seen him at his worst and somehow found something worth defending, he realized he was done making decisions based on what Victor or the council expected. "Actually," Callum said, "I have a proposal." The council turned their attention to Callum and he felt the familiar tightness in his chest. But this time instead of panic there was clarity. He had spent weeks learning to be steady, to breathe through fear. Clara had taught him that, whether she'd intended to or not. "The falconry program has been understaffed for 2 years, Callum said. "Since William Brennan's death, we've relied on a head falconer who, by his own admission, is stretched too thin. The birds have suffered. The handlers have struggled. And when a crisis occurred, we had no one with the specialized skill to address it." The head falconer nodded slowly. "His Grace is correct. I've submitted requests for additional staff repeatedly." "Then I'm approving those requests," Callum said. "Effective immediately, we're expanding the falconry department. And I'm offering Miss Brennan a position as specialist trainer, reporting jointly to the head falconer and to the estate management." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Creating a position for filling a documented need with a qualified candidate," Callum interrupted. "Miss Brennan has demonstrated expertise that exceeds our current capacity. If she chooses to accept, she'll work with all the estate's birds, not just one. She'll train handlers, develop protocols, and ensure we never face this kind of crisis again." He turned to Clara, whose expression was carefully neutral, though he could see the shock in her eyes. "Miss Brennan, I'm not offering this because of personal feelings or sentiment. I'm offering it because you're the most skilled falconer I've encountered, and this estate needs your expertise. But the choice is entirely yours. The courtyard was silent. Clara stood very still, the falcon calm on its perch beside her. Callum could see her thinking, weighing the implications, understanding that accepting would tie her to the estate, and to him, in ways that were complicated and possibly dangerous. "May I have a day to consider?" Clara asked finally. "Of course," Callum said. Victor stepped forward, his voice tight. "I'd like to request a private council session to discuss the broader implications of this decision." "Granted," Callum said. "Tomorrow morning. For now, this review is concluded." The council dispersed slowly, members speaking in low tones. The head falconer approached Clara before leaving. "Your father taught you well," he said quietly. "Better than I realized. If you accept His Grace's offer, I would be honored to work with you." After everyone had left, Clara and Callum remained in the courtyard. The falcon preened its feathers, oblivious to the weight of what had just transpired. "You didn't have to do that," Clara said. "I know. Victor will use it against you. He'll say you're creating positions for people you're involved with, that you're letting personal feelings dictate estate business." "He'll say that regardless," Callum replied. "At least this way it's true that you're qualified. Undeniably so after today." Clara turned to face him fully. "And are you involved with me?" The question was direct, demanding honesty. Callum could deflect, could maintain professional distance, could protect them both from the complications of admitting the truth. But he was tired of performing caution, of letting fear make his decisions. "Yes," he said simply. "I am. I have been for weeks probably. I'm not expecting anything from you. I know your position is precarious, and any relationship between us would be complicated in ways I can't fully protect you from. But you asked for honesty, and that's the honest answer." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I should say no to the position. I should take the reference you promised, find work somewhere else, and leave before this gets more tangled than it already is." "You should," Callum agreed. "It would be the smart choice." "But I don't want to," Clara said, and there was something raw in her voice. "I don't want to go back to kitchens or find another estate where I have to prove myself all over again. I want to work with birds. I want to do what my father trained me for. And I want—" She stopped, but Callum heard what she hadn't said. "I can't promise you that this will be easy," he said. "Victor will keep pushing. The council will watch everything we do. There will be people who assume the worst about why you're here." "I've dealt with people assuming the worst my entire life," Clara said. "At least this time I'll be doing it while actually using my skills." "So that's a yes?" Clara smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her in days. "That's it, probably yes, pending details about salary and housing and whether I get to tell the head falconer when he's wrong about training methods." Callum laughed, surprising himself. "All negotiable." The falcon chose that moment to fly down from its perch, landing on the ground between them. It walked forward calmly and settled near their feet, head tucked slightly at rest. The bird that had been violent and traumatized 3 weeks ago now existed peacefully in their shared presence. "It knows," Clara said softly. "Knows what?" "That you're safe. That this space is safe. That whatever happens next, it won't be abandoned again." Callum understood she wasn't just talking about the falcon. That evening, Callum prepared for the council session with meticulous care. He reviewed estate finances, documented the falconry program's needs, and prepared responses to every objection Victor might raise. But beneath the practical preparation was a deeper shift. He was no longer trying to be Edmund or his father. He was figuring out how to be himself, flawed, uncertain, but willing to defend what mattered. Clara spent the evening in the cottage, writing out her terms for the position. Salary, authority, housing, training, budget. She approached it like the negotiation it was, refusing to accept the offer out of gratitude or personal feeling. If she was going to stay, it would be on terms that recognized her value. When they met briefly before bed, Callum handed her a sealed letter. "Your reference," he said. "As promised. Regardless of what you decide about the position, this is yours." Clara took it, feeling the weight of the paper. "You wrote it before the demonstration." "I wrote it after the first week," Callum admitted. "I knew then that you deserved it." Clara slipped the letter into her pocket, a safety net she hoped she wouldn't need. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "I know. Victor won't give up easily." "I know that too," Callum said. "But I'm done making decisions based on what Victor wants. It's time to figure out what I want, and whether I'm brave enough to fight for it." Clara met his eyes in the darkness. "And what do you want?" "To be a duke who makes decisions I can defend," Callum said. To honor my brother's memory without being destroyed by it. And to see where this goes with you if you'll let me. That's a lot to want, Clara said. Then I'll start with the first one and work my way down, Callum replied. They parted without touching, both aware that the next day would determine whether any of what they wanted was actually possible. The council session convened at dawn in the formal chamber, all members present. Victor had clearly spent the night preparing as well. He arrived with documents, financial reports, and what appeared to be staff testimonials. Callum recognized the strategy. Overwhelm with evidence, create the appearance of objective concern. Before we discuss Miss Brennan's proposed position, Victor began, I'd like to address a pattern of decisions that concern me deeply. Decisions that suggest His Grace is allowing personal attachments to compromise his judgment. He laid out a timeline, the housing arrangement, the exclusive access to the Falcon, the hours spent in the courtyard, the deviation from established protocols. Presented this way, it looked damning. Several council members exchanged glances. Lord Ridley makes serious implications, one council member said carefully. Your Grace, how do you respond? Callum had prepared for this. My cousin is correct that I've made unconventional decisions. What he frames as personal attachment, I would describe as recognizing competence regardless of where it appears. Miss Brennan's results speak for themselves. The question isn't whether my decisions were conventional, it's whether they were effective. Effectiveness alone doesn't justify abandoning protocol, Victor countered. A duke who makes exceptions for people he favors sets a dangerous precedent. Today it's a falconer. Tomorrow it's financial decisions, land management, marriage alliances. Where does it end? It ends with judgment, Callum said. With the ability to distinguish between reasonable flexibility and reckless abandon. I'm not proposing we eliminate all protocol. I'm proposing we recognize when protocol serves us and when it constrains us unnecessarily. Victor's expression sharpened. And you believe you possess that judgment? You who've been duke for less than a year. Who by your own admission has struggled with the responsibility. The attack was personal now, designed to undermine Callum's confidence. Callum felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the voice that whispered Victor was right, that he wasn't qualified, that he should step aside. But he thought of Clara standing in the courtyard with the Falcon on her shoulder, of her voice saying judgment without care is just cruelty with better manners. I do struggle, Callum said clearly. I question my decisions constantly. I'm uncertain more often than I'm confident. But I've learned that uncertainty isn't the same as incompetence. Sometimes the people who are most sure of themselves are simply the ones who refuse to consider they might be wrong. He looked directly at Victor as he said this and saw his cousin's jaw tighten. My brother was an exceptional duke, Callum continued. But he wasn't perfect and neither was our father. They made mistakes. They had doubts. The difference is they hid them well enough that people like me believed leadership meant never being uncertain. I don't believe that anymore. A touching philosophy, Victor said coldly. But philosophy doesn't manage an estate. Concrete decisions do. And I'm asking this council to consider whether your concrete decisions demonstrate the judgment required for your position. The room fell silent. This was the moment Callum had known was coming. Victor calling for a formal vote of confidence. If the council sided with Victor, Callum could be removed, his title and authority transferred to a regent until his competence could be restored. Before anyone could speak, the door opened. The head falconer entered, looking apologetic. Forgive the interruption, my lords, but there's something the council should know. Victor frowned. This is a closed session. It concerns Miss Brennan's qualifications, the falconer said. Which seems relevant to the discussion. Callum nodded for him to continue. I spent last evening reviewing my predecessor's records, the falconer said. William Brennan kept detailed notes on his daughter's training, beginning when she was 8 years old and continuing until his death. The documentation is extraordinary. Clara Brennan has more recorded training hours than any handler currently employed by this estate, including myself. He placed a thick journal on the table. William intended to petition for her official certification as a master falconer. He died before he could complete the application. But by any objective measure, Miss Brennan's qualifications exceed our current standards. Victor picked up the journal, flipping through pages covered in meticulous handwriting. His expression revealed nothing, but Callum saw him recalculating. This doesn't address the broader concern, Victor said finally. His Grace's judgment, not Miss Brennan's qualifications, is what's in question. Actually, another council member said, Lady Ashford, who had been silent until now, I think it does address it. His Grace identified someone with exceptional, documented skill who was being wasted in the kitchens due to prejudice. That seems like precisely the kind of judgment we should want in a duke. Lady Ashford makes a fair point, another member agreed. The falcon is recovered, the solution was unorthodox but effective, and we now have documentation of Miss Brennan's qualifications. I'm not convinced there's a problem here. Victor's control of the room was slipping. He tried once more. The Duke created a position specifically for someone he has personal feelings for. That remains problematic regardless of her qualifications. Does it? Lady Ashford asked. My late husband created 3 positions for people he believed in. One of them was you, Lord Ridley, when you joined this council despite being young and relatively inexperienced. Was that poor judgment or recognition of potential? The comparison landed hard. Victor had no response that wouldn't sound hypocritical. The vote, when it came, was decisive. 8 council members supported Callum's authority to make the appointment. Only Victor and 1 other dissented. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. After the session ended, Lady Ashford approached Callum privately. Your brother would be proud of you, she said quietly. Not because you're like him, but because you're finally becoming yourself. Callum felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you, my lady. Though I should warn you, she added with a slight smile, you're going to face scrutiny over your relationship with Miss Brennan. People will watch. They'll gossip. Being Duke doesn't give you privacy. I know, Callum said. And you're willing to accept that? The complications. Callum thought of Clara in the courtyard, steady and uncompromising, teaching a traumatized falcon to trust again. Yes, he said. I am. Lady Ashford nodded approvingly. Then you might actually be suited for this position after all. Callum found Clara in the mews working with 2 of the younger birds. She had accepted the position that morning, signing the contract with the same careful precision she applied to everything. Now she moved through the space like she'd always belonged there, adjusting perches, checking equipment, completely at ease. The council voted in your favor, Callum said from the doorway. Clara didn't turn around, but he saw her shoulders relax slightly. I heard. Lady Ashford sent word. Victor won't stop, Callum said. He'll keep watching, waiting for us to make a mistake. Then we won't make mistakes, Clara said simply. She finished securing a leather strap and finally turned to face him. Or we'll make them anyway because that's what people do and we'll deal with the consequences. Callum stepped into the mews, careful not to startle the birds. I need to tell you something. About what happens next. Clara's expression became guarded. All right. The council gave me their support today, but Lady Ashford was clear about the price. People will watch us. Everything we do together will be scrutinized, interpreted, gossiped about. Your work will be questioned constantly, and my judgment will be measured by your successes and failures. I know all that, Clara said. I need you to understand what it means, Callum pressed. If we pursue this, whatever this is between us, it will be public. Uncomfortable. You'll face criticism I can't shield you from. People will say you're using me, that I'm being manipulated, that neither of us can be trusted. And if we don't pursue it? Clara asked. If we keep things strictly professional? Then we lie, Callum said. To everyone else and to ourselves. And eventually that becomes its own kind of trap. Clara leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. So we're damned either way. Probably, Callum admitted. But at least one way is honest. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. My father used to say that working with birds taught you about freedom. That the whole point was to train them well enough that they could leave, and have them choose to stay anyway. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to stay because I'm trapped by circumstance or obligation, Clara said. I don't want to be here because leaving would be complicated or because I need the position. I want to stay because I choose to, freely, understanding exactly what that choice costs. And do you? Callum asked. Choose to stay. Clara met his eyes directly. Yes, but not just for you. For the work. For the birds. For the chance to do what I was trained for. You're part of that, but you're not all of it. Good, Callum said and meant it. I don't want to be all of it. I want you to have your own reasons, your own purpose. Otherwise this becomes something neither of us can sustain. Very rational, Clara said, a hint of amusement in her voice. I'm trying to learn from you, Callum replied. You approach everything with such clarity. I'm attempting the same. Clarity, Clara repeated. Is that what we're calling it? She moved closer to him, and Callum felt his careful rationality begin to fray. Because what I'm feeling right now isn't particularly clear. What are you feeling? Callum asked, his voice lower. Terrified, Clara said honestly. Excited. Angry that it has to be this complicated. Grateful that you're willing to let it be complicated anyway. Callum reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He took her hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength in her fingers. We'll take it slowly. We'll be careful. We'll. Clara kissed him, cutting off his careful planning. It was brief, decisive, and entirely her choice. When she pulled back, her expression was challenging. Or we could stop overthinking it. Callum laughed, surprised and relieved. That's probably not wise. Most good things aren't, Clara said. Over the following weeks they fell into a rhythm. Clara worked with the birds, developed training protocols, and slowly earned the respect of the other handlers. The head falconer became her advocate, praising her innovations and defending her authority when questioned. The work was demanding, but Clara thrived in it, coming alive in ways Callum hadn't seen before. Callum focused on estate management with renewed purpose. He stopped trying to replicate his brother's style and began developing his own, more cautious perhaps, but also more thoughtful. He consulted people, asked questions, admitted uncertainty. Some council members found it frustrating. Others found it refreshing. Victor remained a constant presence, watching for weakness, but without explicit ammunition, his influence waned. He attended council meetings, raised objections, but the other members had begun to trust Callum's judgment. The relationship between Callum and Clara became an open secret. They didn't hide it, but they didn't flaunt it either. Clara lived in the cottage near the mews. Callum visited in the evenings and they talked about birds, about estate business, about the small details of their days. Sometimes they argued, about training methods, about council politics, about whose turn it was to admit they'd been wrong about something. It wasn't simple or uncomplicated. There were moments when the weight of scrutiny felt suffocating, when Clara questioned whether staying was worth it, when Callum worried he was being selfish by asking her to endure this. But there were also mornings when Callum arrived at the mews to find Clara already working, completely absorbed in what she was doing, and he understood that she was exactly where she belonged. There were evenings when they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the falcon, Edmund's falcon, fly free and return by choice. 3 months after the council vote, Lady Ashford requested a private meeting with Callum. He expected criticism or warning, but instead she handed him a letter. From the Royal Falconry Society, she said. They've heard about Miss Brennan's work. They're inviting her to present at their annual conference. Callum read the letter, pride swelling in his chest. This is extraordinary. It's also strategic, Lady Ashford said. If she presents successfully, it legitimizes her position beyond anything you or this council could provide. It makes her reputation independent of your support. She deserves that, Callum said. She does, Lady Ashford agreed. But it also means you'll need to let her go. Temporarily for the conference. And it means accepting that she'll have opportunities elsewhere, offers from other estates, recognition that doesn't depend on you. Callum understood what she was really asking. Was he secure enough to let Clara build a life that wasn't entirely defined by their relationship? I'll tell her about the invitation, Callum said. And I'll support whatever she decides. Lady Ashford smiled. You're learning. Finally. Clara stared at the invitation, reading it 3 times before setting it down carefully on the workbench. The Royal Falconry Society, she said quietly. My father dreamed of presenting there. He never got the chance. You don't have to decide immediately, Callum said, though he could see in her expression that she'd already decided. I want to go, Clara said. But I need to know that you understand what this means. It means your work is being recognized at the highest level. It means I'll have options, Clara interrupted. Other estates will make offers. Better positions possibly. More resources, more prestige. And you need to be prepared for the possibility that I might consider them. The honesty stung, but Callum had learned enough to recognize it as respect, not cruelty. I am prepared, he said. Or I'm trying to be. Clara moved closer, her voice softer now. I'm not saying I want to leave. But I need to know that you're with me because you choose to be, not because you're afraid of losing me. And I need the same freedom. To choose, Callum said. Every day, Clara confirmed. Not just once. Not just because it's convenient or because walking away would be complicated. But because we keep deciding that this, whatever we're building, is worth the effort. Callum took her hand. Then you go to the conference. You present your work. You listen to whatever offers come. And then you decide what you want, freely, without obligation to me or anyone else. And if I come back? Then I'll know it's because you chose to, Callum said. Which is the only reason I'd want you to stay anyway. Clara left for the conference 2 weeks later. The estate felt different in her absence, quieter, less vital somehow. Callum threw himself into work, but found his attention drifting to the mews, to the cottage where her things still sat waiting. The falcon seemed restless too, as if sensing her absence. Victor noticed, of course. She'll find better opportunities, he said one evening after a council meeting. Someone with her skills could work for the crown, for wealthier estates. She'd be foolish to come back here. Perhaps, Callum said, refusing to take the bait. And when she doesn't return, what then? Victor pressed. You'll have created a position you can't fill, given authority to someone who abandoned it. The council will question your judgment all over again. Then that's a problem for future me, Callum said. Right now, I'm choosing to trust that Clara will make the decision that's right for her. Even if that decision doesn't include me. Victor looked at him for a long moment, something like reluctant respect in his expression. You've changed, he said finally. You're not the uncertain boy who inherited this title. No, Callum agreed. I'm an uncertain man who's learning to be comfortable with uncertainty. Clara returned after 10 days. Callum was in the library when he heard the commotion, staff greeting her, voices carrying through the halls. He forced himself to remain seated, to give her space to arrive on her own terms rather than rushing to meet her like an anxious child. She found him an hour later, still in the library, pretending to read estate reports. She looked tired but energized, her eyes bright with the kind of satisfaction that came from work well done. How was the presentation? Callum asked, keeping his voice neutral. Successful, Clara said. Very successful. I had 3 offers before I even left the city. Callum's chest tightened, but he kept his expression steady. Tell me about them. Clara sat across from him, describing each opportunity in detail. They were impressive, royal appointments, prestigious positions, resources beyond anything the estate could offer. Any one of them would have been the culmination of a career. She laid them out objectively, without emotion, and Callum listened without interrupting. So which one are you taking? He asked when she finished. None of them, Clara said. Callum blinked. None? I turned them all down, Clara said. Politely, gratefully, but definitively. Why? Clara leaned forward, her expression serious. Because I spent 10 days surrounded by the most accomplished falconers in the country, doing work that my father would have been proud of, receiving recognition I've wanted my entire life. And the whole time all I could think about was getting back here. To the mews. To the birds. To you. Clara. Let me finish, she said. Those offers were incredible. And a year ago I would have taken any of them without hesitation. But they felt empty compared to what I've built here. Not just the work but the life. The ability to make decisions, to implement changes, to see results that matter. And yes, you're part of that. A significant partícula. But it's bigger than just us. You're sure? Callum asked. I chose, Clara said simply. Freely. Understanding exactly what I was turning down and why. I chose this. I chose you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Callum stood, moving around the desk to where she sat. I don't have anything as grand as royal appointments to offer you. Good, Clara said. I don't want grand. I want real. I want work that matters and someone who understands why it matters. I want arguments about training methods and evenings watching birds fly and the complicated, messy reality of building something together. That I can offer, Callum said. Clara stood, closing the distance between them. Then offer it. Not as the dupe to his employee but as yourself to me. Callum took her hands, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that came from years of demanding work. Clara Brennan, I am completely uncertain about most things in my life. I question my decisions constantly. I'm probably making mistakes right now that I won't recognize for months. But I'm absolutely certain that I want to build a life with you. Whatever that looks like. However complicated it gets. That's the most romantic expression of anxiety I've ever heard, Clara said, smiling. I'm working with what I have, Callum replied. She kissed him then, and it felt different from before, not tentative or stolen but deliberate. A choice made and remade freely by 2 people who understood exactly what they were choosing. Outside, the falcon called from the mews. They broke apart, both smiling at the timing. The bird's probably hungry, Clara said. Probably, Callum agreed. Should we? Yes, Clara said. We should. They walked to the mews together, side by side, neither leading nor following. The falcon greeted Clara with familiar calls, settled and content. It had healed just as they had, not completely, not without scars, but enough to move forward. Enough to fly and return, to trust and be trusted, to choose and be chosen. In the fading afternoon light, Callum watched Clara work with the bird his brother had loved, and understood finally what Edmund had tried to tell him in that journal. Leadership wasn't about certainty or perfection. It was about showing up. About making choices you could defend. About recognizing what mattered and fighting for it, even when the path forward was unclear. Victor would keep watching. The council would keep questioning. There would be setbacks and doubts and moments when everything felt impossible. But standing in the mews with Clara, watching her do the work she was born for, Callum felt something he hadn't experienced since becoming Duke: genuine hope. Not the desperate kind that denied reality, but the steady kind that acknowledged difficulty and chose to keep going anyway. The falcon launched from its perch, circling the courtyard in the golden light. It climbed higher, wings strong and sure, and for a moment Callum thought it might keep going, might finally choose freedom over return. But it turned, banking gracefully, and came back to Clara's glove. Always back. Always choosing to return. Beautiful, Callum said softly. Yes, Clara agreed, though she was looking at him, not the bird. It is. 6 months later, the estate transformed in ways both visible and subtle. The falconry program flourished under Clara's leadership. 3 new handlers trained, protocols documented, birds healthier than they'd been in years. The Mews became a place people visited not out of obligation but genuine interest, drawn by Clara's reputation and the quality of work being done there. Callum's leadership evolved too. He stopped apologizing for his uncertainty and started using it as a tool, asking questions that revealed problems others had stopped noticing. The council meetings changed character. Less performative, more substantive. Even Victor's opposition mellowed into something closer to respectful disagreement. "You've surprised me," Victor admitted one evening after a particularly productive session. "I thought you'd fail spectacularly. Instead you've become competent." "Don't sound so disappointed," Callum said dryly. "I'm not," Victor said, and seemed to mean it. Edmund would have been proud. "You're not him, but you're becoming someone equally valuable. Someone who asks, why, instead of just accepting because." It was the closest thing to approval Victor had ever offered, and Callum accepted it with a simple nod. The gossip about Callum and Clara never fully disappeared, but it transformed from scandal to accepted reality. They were careful, professional in public, private in their affections, but they stopped pretending there was nothing between them. Staff adjusted. The council stopped remarking on it. Even Lady Ashford's warnings softened into occasional advice about managing appearances. "People will always talk," she told Clara during one of their now regular consultations. "The question is whether you give them substance or just speculation." "And we're giving them substance?" Clara asked. "You're giving them competence," Lady Ashford corrected. "Which is better. Let your work speak louder than their gossip." On a mild spring morning, Callum found Clara in the courtyard with Edmund's falcon. The bird was magnificent now, fully recovered, its plumage glossy, its eyes bright and alert. It had become the centerpiece of the falconry program, a living testament to what patience and skill could accomplish. "I've been thinking," Clara said as Callum approached, "about what comes next." "For the program?" "For everything," Clara said. She sent the falcon into flight with a fluid motion, watching it climb. "We've built something here. Something that works. But we've been so focused on survival, proving ourselves, defending our choices, that we haven't talked about what we're actually building toward." Callum watched the falcon circle, understanding what she was really asking. "What do you want it to be?" "A partnership," Clara said. "Real partnership, not just professional arrangement. Not you as Duke and me as employee, but equals building something together." "Marriage?" Callum said quietly. "Eventually, maybe," Clara said. "If that's what we decide. But I'm not talking about titles or ceremonies. I'm talking about the actual structure of our lives. How we make decisions. How we share authority. Whether I'm always going to be the falconer who happened to catch the Duke's attention, or if we're going to be something more complicated and honest than that." The falcon dove, pulling up at the last moment in a perfect demonstration of controlled power. Clara caught it on her glove without looking, her attention entirely on Callum. "I want the complicated and honest version," Callum said. "I want you as partner, not subordinate. I want your opinion on estate matters that have nothing to do with birds. I want arguments when we disagree and collaboration when we align. I want whatever structure we can build that feels true to both of us." The council won't like it, Clara said. The council will adjust, Callum replied. Just like they've adjusted to everything else. Clara smiled, the fierce, delighted smile that still caught Callum off guard. Then I think we should make it official. Not marriage, not yet. But a formal partnership. Equal authority in our respective domains, with joint consultation on major decisions. Victor will have an apoplexy, Callum said. Victor will survive, Clara countered. He's tougher than he looks. They spent the afternoon drafting a proposal, working through the practical details of what shared authority would mean. It was complex, occasionally frustrating, and absolutely necessary. They argued about specific terms, compromised on others, and slowly constructed something neither had envisioned alone. That evening they presented the proposal to the council. There was debate, certainly. Questions about precedent and propriety and whether the Duke could legally share authority in this way. But there was also recognition that what Callum and Clara had built together worked better than what had existed before. The vote, when it came, was closer than Callum hoped but sufficient. 7 in favor, 4 abstaining, 2 opposed. The partnership was official. Afterward, in the quiet of the mews, Clara and Callum stood with the falcon. The bird preened contentedly, secure in its environment, no longer traumatized by loss. Edmund would have liked this, Callum said. Not the specific outcome but the principle. Building something new instead of just preserving what was. Your brother sounds wise, Clara said. He was, Callum agreed. But he was also wrong about some things. He thought leadership meant having all the answers. I'm learning it means knowing which questions to ask. And what questions are you asking now? Clara said. Callum turned to face her fully. Whether what we've built can last. Whether we're strong enough to sustain it through whatever comes next. Whether I can be both Duke and partner without failing at either. Those are good questions, Clara said. I don't have answers for all of them. Neither do I, Callum admitted. But I'm willing to figure them out together. If you are. Clara took his hand, the gesture familiar now but still meaningful. I am. For however long it takes. The falcon launched from its perch unprompted, flying up into the evening sky. They watched it climb higher than it had in months, wings powerful against the darkening blue. For a moment it seemed to hesitate, testing the possibility of true freedom. Then it turned as it always did and came back. Not because it was trapped or obligated but because this was home. Because return was a choice made freely every single time. Clara raised her glove, and the falcon landed with perfect precision. Beautiful, Callum whispered. Yes, Clara agreed, smiling at him. It really is. Above them the first stars emerged, marking the transition from day to night, from what was to what might be. The estate settled into evening rhythms, staff completing tasks, lights appearing in windows, the ordinary continuation of life. And in the courtyard, surrounded by the birds they'd saved and the partnership they'd built, Callum and Clara stood together. Not certain of what would come. Not free from doubt or challenge. But choosing each other, choosing this life, choosing to keep building something worth defending. The falcon called once, sharp and clear, a sound not of distress but of contentment. Callum understood exactly how it felt.